Okay, this is the third play from Meyer's High Guard with the Longsword. Fair warning, this video is brought to you by a combination of sleep deprivation and then a really hard workout this morning. So I'm going to do my best, but if I get a little rambly, I apologize. So as I've done with the other videos, I'm going to read you the translation of the play, give you kind of my mental shorthand, and then how I practice it on the Pel. So here's the translation. Now if he cuts to your right when you have thus come into the High Guard, then quickly step out from his cut with your left foot towards his right, and at the same time let your long edge fall on top of his forte. And when you fall thus on his sword, then push your pommel through under your right arm so that you strike at his head with crossed hands with the short edge over or beside his sword. Now if he goes up with his sword towards his right, then let the short edge run off by that side, and meanwhile step out to the side well toward his left and cut with the long edge straight from above at his head. And pull quickly back and strike with a thwart from below at his left ear with a back step on your left foot, at once cut away from him, etc. So it is not a particularly long or complicated play. You pulled up to the High Guard and they've cut at your right. You're going to step left away from his cut, the long edge suppressing cut. From there we're going to shove our pommel under our right arm and throw kind of a flicking hit to their head with our false edge. If they raise their sword, which is going to push us over, we're going to step back the other way, cut straight down with our long edge, back step with our left, with kind of a rising thwart cut at their ear, and then we're going to leave cutting away. That's the whole play. So my mental shorthand for this is I'm in my High Guard, I'm going to step out and suppress, flicking back edge cut, rolling around to a high scalp cut, basically, step back with a thwart cut, leave with probably another thwart cut. That's kind of my mental shorthand. The cool thing about this play is not that it's particularly complicated or that the movements are super complex or tricky. It's what it tells us about fencing. So I say a lot that context is really important, and really everybody that studies the historical manuals talks about the context of the art that you're studying. One of the things that Meyer says in the longsword section is that thrusting has been abolished among us Germans. That does not mean that Germans don't know how to thrust. That doesn't mean that Germans don't thrust. In the particular time and place that Meyer is writing, stabbing your fellow Germans is a bad thing, right? They're needed for defense of the land. So playing with swords is super fun. Being tried for murder is not. And in some of the German city-states, you could get in a lot of trouble for stabbing people. So instead of thrusting, we have these little flicking tag hits. But if you read the entirety of Meyer's work, which you should, you see that thrusting is all over the place. He teaches you how to thrust. So we can kind of use these little flicking tag hits as a code for if I'm fencing my buddy, I'm just going to whack him in the head with the back edge. If I'm fencing somebody for real, I'm going to stab them in the face. And the motions are very nearly identical. And in this play, they're pretty much identical. So if I'm in my High Guard, I step away and suppress, and I shove my pommel under my right arm. Rather than hitting my opponent, that actually lets me align my point very nicely for a thrust right into the face. And then everything else is the same. I'm just going to stab them. If they push that away, I'm going to let it flow around. I'm going to throw my downward cut, throw my thwart with the back edge, and then leave. I tend to just practice this with the thrust because whether you're training and practicing and competing in an SCA context or a HEMA context, it's very possible that this will not be recognized as a valid hit, whereas lining up and stabbing somebody in the face absolutely would be. It also tends to flow better on the Pel. So I just practice it with the thrust motion, but I understand that if I were in a thrust-free context, I would use that little flicking tag hit. So when I practice this on the Pel, the things that I've talked about before still apply. I would rather be out of range and step up into my High Guard to provoke. So I'm going to step away, suppress, thrust, just shoving that pommel under my arm gives me a nice alignment of my thrust. Step back to my right with this kind of downward cut, back step with the thwart, then leave with the cutting away. Meyer doesn't differentiate a high or a low attack, and it's not super often you're just going to get an initial opening attack to your lower right quadrant. It might happen out of a combination, so it's good to practice. I just hedge my bets by doing 5 and 5. So I will do 5 where I'm assuming that I'm suppressing a high cut, push my pommel under to get the thrust lined up, step around with the cut, port, and leave, and then I will just assume a low cut, and so I'll get a slightly lower And the back hit motion is actually pretty good. You can get a nice little swipe with the false edge and this pommel motion from a low attack. But you can also just line up your thrust, cut, port, leave. Works out just fine. So hopefully that is helpful for everybody. And if you have any